For as long as I can remember, I have been in love with stories. Legends, folklore, and tales of magic and mystery always brought me a sense of wonder and soon became my favorites. In my mind, those types of stories always made the world more magical, and life just seemed more fun that way.
The Loch Ness Monster, affectionately called Nessie, is a creature in Scottish folklore that is said to inhabit Loch Ness in the Scottish Highlands. It's usually described as large, long-necked, and having one or more humps that protrude from the water. Popular interest and belief in the creature has varied since it was brought to worldwide attention in 1933. Evidence of its existence is anecdotal at best, and there are a number of disputed photographs and sonar readings that people often discuss as well. The scientific community explains alleged sightings of the Loch Ness Monster as hoaxes, wishful thinking, and the misidentification of mundane objects. The pseudoscience and subculture of cryptozoology has placed particular emphasis on the creature. In August of 1933, the Courier published the account of George Spicer's alleged sighting. Public interest skyrocketed, with countless letters being sent in, all detailing different sightings, describing a monster fish, a sea serpent, or a dragon, with the final name ultimately settling on Loch Ness Monster. Since the 1940s, the creature has been affectionately called Nessie. The earliest report of a monster in the vicinity of Loch Ness appears in the Life of St. Columba by Adamnan, written in the 6th century AD. According to Adamnan, writing about a century after the events described, Irish monk St. Columba was staying in the land of the Picts with his companions when he encountered local residents burying a man by the River Ness. They explained that the man was swimming in the river when he was attacked by a water beast that mauled him and dragged him underwater, despite their attempts to rescue him by boat. Columba sent a follower to swim across the river. The beast approached him, but Columba made the sign of the cross and said, "Go no farther. Do not touch the man. Go back at once." The creature stopped, as if it had been pulled back with ropes, and fled. Columba's men and the Picts gave thanks for what they perceived as a miracle. Believers in the monster point to this story, set in the River Ness rather than the loch itself, as evidence for the creature's existence as early as the 6th century. Skeptics question the narrative's reliability, noting that water beast stories were extremely common in medieval hagiographies. And Adamnan's tale probably recycles a common motif attached to a local landmark. According to skeptics, the story may be independent of the modern Loch Ness Monster legend, and became attached to it by believers seeking to bolster their claims with historical evidence. Ronald Binns considers that this is the most serious of various alleged early sightings of the monster, but all other claimed sightings before 1933 are dubious and do not prove a monster tradition before that date. Christopher Carney uses a specific historical and cultural analysis of Adamnan to separate his story about St. Columba from the modern myth of the Loch Ness Monster, but finds an earlier and culturally significant use of the Celtic water beast folklore along the way. In doing so, he also discredits any strong connection between kelpies or water horses and the modern, as he calls it, media-augmented creation of the Loch Ness Monster. He also concludes that the story of St. Columba may have been impacted by earlier Irish myths about similar beasts. In October of 1871 or 1872, depending on the source, D. Mackenzie of Balnain reportedly saw an object resembling a log or an upturned boat, quote, wriggling and churning up the water, end quote. Apparently it moved slowly at first, before disappearing at a faster speed. The account was not published until 1934, when Mackenzie sent his story in a letter to Rupert Gould, shortly after popular interest in the monster increased. In 1888, Mason Alexander MacDonald sighted a large stubby-legged animal surfacing from the loch and propelling itself within 50 yards of the shore where MacDonald stood. He reported his sighting to Loch Ness water bailiff Alex Campbell and described the creature as looking like a salamander. The best-known article that first attracted a great deal of attention about a creature was published on May 2, 1933, in the Inverness Courier, about a large beast or whale-like fish. The article by Alex Campbell, water bailiff for Loch Ness and a part-time journalist, discussed a sighting by Aldi Mackay of an enormous creature with the body of a whale rolling in the water in the loch, while she and her husband John were driving on the A82 on the 15th of April in 1933. The word monster was reportedly applied for the first time in Campbell's article, although some reports claim that it was coined by editor Evan Barron. The Courier in 2017 published excerpts from the Campbell article, which had been titled Strange Spectacle in Loch Ness. Quote, the creature disported itself, rolling and plunging for fully a minute, its body resembling that of a whale, and the water cascading and churning like a simmering cauldron. Soon, however, it disappeared in a boiling mass of foam. Both onlookers confessed that there was something uncanny about the whole thing, for they realized that here was no ordinary denizen of the depths, because, apart from its enormous size, the beast, in taking the final plunge, sent out waves that were big enough to have been caused by a passing steamer. End quote. According to a 2013 article, Mackay said that she had yelled, "Stop the beast," when viewing the spectacle. In the late 1980s, a naturalist interviewed Aldi Mackay, and she admitted to knowing that there had been an oral tradition of a beast in the loch well before her claimed sighting. Alex Campbell's 1933 article also stated that, quote, Loch Ness has for generations been credited with being the home of a fearsome-looking monster. Modern interest in the monster was sparked by a sighting on July 22, 1933, when George Spicer and his wife saw, quote, a most extraordinary form of animal, end quote, cross the road in front of their car. They described the creature as having a large body, about 4 feet or 1.2 meters high, and 25 feet or 8 meters long, and a long, wavy, narrow neck, slightly thicker than an elephant's trunk, and as long as the 10 to 12 foot or 3 to 4 meter width of the road. They saw no limbs. It lurched across the road toward the loch 20 yards away, leaving a trail of broken undergrowth in its wake. Spicer described it as, quote, the nearest approach to a dragon or prehistoric animal that I have ever seen in my life, end quote, and as having, quote, a long neck, which moved up and down in the manner of a scenic railway, end quote. He also said it had an animal of some kind in its mouth, that it had a body that was fairly big, with a high back, but that if there were any feet, they must have been of the web kind. He couldn't say if it had a tail or not because it moved so rapidly, and when they finally got to the spot, it had disappeared into the loch. On the 4th of August 1933, the Courier published a report of Spicer's sighting. This sighting triggered a massive amount of public interest and an uptick in alleged sightings, leading to the solidification of the actual name Loch Ness Monster. It has been claimed that sightings of the monster increased after a road was built along the loch early in 1933, bringing workers and tourists to the formerly isolated area. However, Binns had described this as the myth of the lonely loch, as it was far from isolated before then, due to the construction of the Caledonian Canal. In the 1930s, the existing road by the side of the loch was given a serious upgrade. Hugh Gray's photograph, taken near Foyers on November 12th of 1933, was the first photograph alleged to depict the monster. It was slightly blurred, and it has been noted that if one looks closely, the head of a dog can be seen. Gray had taken his Labrador for a walk that day, and it is suspected that the photograph depicts his dog fetching a stick from the loch. Others have suggested that the photograph depicts an otter or a swan. The original negative was lost. However, in 1963, Maurice Burton came into possession of 2 lantern slides, contact positives from the original negative, and when projected onto a screen, they revealed, quote, an otter rolling at the surface in characteristic fashion. On January 5th of 1934, a motorcyclist, Arthur Grant, claimed to have nearly hit the creature at about 1 a.m. on a moonlit night. According to Grant, it had a small head attached to a long neck. The creature saw him and crossed the road back to the loch. Grant, a veterinary student, described it as a cross between a seal and a plesiosaur. He said he dismounted and followed it to the loch, but only saw ripples. Grant produced a sketch of the creature that was examined by zoologist Maurice Burton, who stated it was consistent with the appearance and behavior of an otter. Regarding the long size of the creature reported by Grant, it has been suggested that this was faulty observation due to poor light conditions. Paleontologist Darren Naish has suggested that Grant may have seen either an otter or a seal and exaggerated his sighting over time. Finally, we get to the surgeon's photograph, perhaps the most well-known piece of alleged evidence for the monster. The surgeon's photograph is reportedly the first photo of the creature's head and neck. Supposedly, it was taken by Robert Kenneth Wilson, a London doctor, and it was published in the Daily Mail on April 21st of 1934. Wilson's refusal to have his name associated with it led it to simply being known as the surgeon's photograph. According to Wilson, he was looking at the loch when he saw the monster, grabbed his camera, and snapped 4 photos. Only 2 exposures came out clearly. The first reportedly shows a small head and back, and the second shows a similar head in a diving position. The first photo became well known, and the second attracted little publicity because of its blurriness. For 60 years, the photo was considered evidence of the monster's existence, although skeptics dismissed it as driftwood, an elephant, an otter, or a bird. The photo's scale was controversial. It is often shown cropped, making the creature seem large and the ripples like waves, while the uncropped shot shows the other end of the loch and the monster in the center. The ripples in the photo were found to fit the size and pattern of small ripples, rather than large waves photographed up close. Analysis of the original image fostered further doubt. In 1993, the makers of the Discovery Communications documentary Loch Ness Discovered analyzed the uncropped image and found a white object visible in every version of the photo, implying that it was also on the negative. It was believed to be the cause of the ripples, as if the object was being towed, although the possibility of a blemish on the negative could not be ruled out. An analysis of the full photograph indicated that the object was small, maybe 60 to 90 centimeters, or 2 to 3 feet long. Since 1994, most agreed that the photo was an elaborate hoax. It had been described as fake in a December 7, 1975 Sunday Telegraph article that fell into obscurity. Details of how the photo was taken were published in the 1999 book Nessie, The Surgeon's Photograph Exposed, which contains a facsimile of the 1975 Sunday Telegraph article. The creature was reportedly a toy submarine built by Christian Sperling, the son-in-law of Marmaduke Wetherell. Wetherell had been publicly ridiculed by his employer, the Daily Mail, after he found, quote, Nessie's footprints that turned out to be a hoax. To get revenge on the Mail, Wetherell perpetrated his hoax with co-conspirators Sperling, sculpture specialist, Ian Wetherell, his son, who bought the material for the fake, and Maurice Chambers, an insurance agent. The toy submarine was bought from Woolworths, and its head and neck were made from wood putty. After testing it in a local pond, the group went to Loch Ness, where Ian Wetherell took the photos near the tea house at Altsai. When they heard a water bailiff approaching, Duke Wetherell sank the model with his foot, and it is presumably still somewhere in Loch Ness. Chambers gave the photographic plates to Wilson, a friend of his who enjoyed a good practical joke. Wilson brought the plates to Ogston's, an Inverness chemist, and gave them to George Morrison for development. He sold the first photo to the Daily Mail, who then announced that the monster had been photographed. Little is known of the second photo. It is often ignored by researchers, who believe its quality too poor and its differences from the first photo too great to warrant analysis. It shows a head similar to the first photo, with a more turbulent wave pattern and possibly taken at a different time and location in the loch. Some believe it to be an earlier, cruder attempt at a hoax, and others, including Roy Mackal and Maurice Burton, consider it a picture of a diving bird or otter that Wilson mistook for the monster. According to Morrison, when the plates were developed, Wilson was uninterested in the second photo. He allowed Morrison to keep the negative, and the photo was rediscovered years later. When asked about the second photo by the Ness Information Service newsletter, Sperling, quote, was vague, thought it might have been a piece of wood they were trying out as a monster, but was not sure. Even though the surgeon's photograph is almost certainly a hoax, it didn't stop other people from having sightings of their very own. On the 29th of May in 1938, a South African tourist named G.E. Taylor filmed something in the loch for 3 minutes on 16mm color film. The film was obtained by popular science writer Maurice Burton, who did not show it to other researchers. A single frame was published in his 1961 book, The Elusive Monster. His analysis concluded it was a floating object, not an animal. On the 15th of August 1938, William Fraser, Chief Constable of Inverness-shire, wrote a letter that the monster existed beyond doubt and expressed concern about a hunting party that had arrived with a custom-made harpoon gun, determined to catch the monster dead or alive. He believed his power to protect the monster from the hunters was very doubtful. The letter was released by the National Archives of Scotland on April 27, 2010. In December of 1954, sonar readings were taken by the fishing boat Rival 3. Its crew noted a large object keeping pace with the vessel at a depth of 146 meters, or 479 feet. It was detected for 800 meters, or 2,600 feet, before contact was lost and regained. Previous sonar attempts were inconclusive or negative. Peter McNabb at Urquhart Castle on July 29, 1955, took a photograph that depicted 2 long black humps in the water. The photograph was not made public until it appeared in Constance White's 1957 book on the subject. On the 23rd of October 1958, it was published by the Weekly Scotsman. Author Ronald Binns wrote that, quote, the phenomenon which McNabb photographed could easily be a wave effect resulting from 3 trawlers traveling closely together up the loch, end quote. Other researchers consider the photograph a hoax. Roy Mackal requested to use the photograph in his 1976 book. He received the original negative from McNabb, but discovered it differed from the photograph that appeared in White's book. The tree at the bottom left in White's was missing from the negative. It is suspected that the photograph was doctored by rephotographing a print. Then there was the Dinsdale Film in 1960. Aeronautical engineer Tim Dinsdale filmed a hump that left a wake crossing Loch Ness in 1960. Dinsdale, who reportedly had the sighting on his final day of search, described it as reddish with a blotch on its side. He said that when he mounted his camera, the object began to move, and he shot 40 feet of film. According to Jarek, the object was probably animate. Others were skeptical, saying that the hump cannot be ruled out as being a boat, and when the contrast is increased, a man in a boat can be seen. In 1993, Discovery Communications produced a documentary, Loch Ness Discovered, with a digital enhancement of the Dinsdale Film. A person who enhanced the film noticed a shadow in the negative that was not obvious in the developed film. By enhancing and overlaying frames, he found what appeared to be the rear body of a creature underwater. He said, Before I saw the film, I thought the Loch Ness Monster was a load of rubbish. Having done the enhancement, I'm not so sure." End quote. This would not be the end of reported sightings. The Loch Ness Muppet in 1977, the Holmes video of 2007, sonar images from 2011, the George Edwards photograph in 2011, the David Elder video in 2013, an Apple Maps photograph in 2014, and a Google Street View in 2015 all claim to have caught evidence of Nessie. For every single one of these sightings, scientists and researchers have come up with competing theories as to what it could have been. Several searches have been mounted for the creature as well. The Edward Mountain Expedition, Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, other sonar studies, and the Robert Rhines study, or studies rather, since Robert Rhines conducted multiple, as well as Operation Deep Scan, DNA surveys from 2018, and the BBC-sponsored Search of the Loch, aptly titled Searching for the Loch Ness Monster, of 2003. As for explanations, a number of them have been suggested to account for sightings of the creature. According to Ronald Binns, a former member of the Loch Ness Phenomena Investigation Bureau, there's probably no single explanation of the monster. Binns wrote 2 skeptical books, the 1983 The Loch Ness Mystery Solved, and his 2017 The Loch Ness Mystery Reloaded. In these, he contends that an aspect of human psychology is the ability of the eye to see what it wants to see, what it expects to see. They may be categorized as misidentification of known animals, misidentifications of inanimate objects or effects, or reinterpretations of Scottish folklore, even hoaxes, and exotic species of large animals. A reviewer wrote that Binns had, quote, evolved into the author of the definitive skeptical book on the subject. Binns does not call the sightings a hoax, but rather, quote, a myth in the true sense of the term, end quote, and states that the, quote, monster is a sociological phenomenon. As far as misidentification of known animals, bird wakes, eels, elephants, the Greenland shark, the Wells catfish, and other resident animals have all been pointed to. As far as inanimate objects or effects, trees, wakes, optical effects, seismic gas, and waves have all been pointed to as well. A number of other hoax attempts have been made too, some of which were successful. Other hoaxes were revealed rather quickly by the perpetrators or exposed after diligent research. But what's interesting to me isn't really whether or not the Loch Ness Monster is real. It's that, in spite of having no concrete evidence, this lore has persisted for years and centuries, even if you go back to the very first reported sightings, whether or not they were actually connected to Nessie. I think this shows us what folklore can do. An entire tourist industry in Loch Ness and Scotland in general has come about based on what may very well be a sunken toy. But that is the power of lore. It's the power of story. Do I believe that the Loch Ness Monster exists? Not really. But I wouldn't take the belief away from those who think that it does, because lore is one of those intangible things that helps craft the history of who we are. Whether or not Nessie exists, it's become a permanent fixture in Scottish lore. It adds character, brings people searching, and keeps people curious, and I, for one, think that can't possibly be a bad thing. Long live Nessie, real or not.
A massive thank you to Raven Reeds for narrating for us again this month. Links to her channel and video for this month will be linked in the video description or the end card you see on your screen. Links to our email list will be in the video description as well. And as always, until next time, don't stop believing.